Thanks. I appreciate you having me today again. I had a fabulous time last year sharing some of my thoughts about how we think about being more inclusive and accessible for the world, and enjoyed that you all let me stand on my soapbox. So this year will be no different. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we think about leveraging cells for scale up in our world of Biomilq, and talk a little bit about the evolution of where I hope to see the sector moving in the next year or few years. As Ahmed said, today we're going to talk a little bit about moving the discussion from cell-based to cell-derived, cell-manufactured, cell-produced. I can be open to however you want to call it, but I look forward to an engaged discussion at the end of my chat here. So I'm going to start with a little story. This is a photo of my sister and I back in the early 90s. She's rocking a stellar mullet. She's now a PhD plant scientist over at Syngenta, so I hope she's not too embarrassed that I pulled out this gem of a photo. But if you were a child of the 80s or 90s, you probably recognize some rock and shag carpet here in the United States, avocado green, living our best lives. I still make that same expression when I'm being mischievous. I think you can see where it comes from. And she and I had a great time. She was about 5 years older, so I got to do all kinds of big kid stuff as a little kid. And because my mother had been raised by a dad who was one of the original computer programmers, working on controls programming with punch cards back in the early days of IBM computing to maintain manufacturing facilities, including mills in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I grew up, we were lucky enough to have a personal home computer. Now, granted, it was a 1984 unit that I played on in, like, let's call it 1996. So it wasn't brand new, but it was a joy and one of the favorite toys my sister and I would play with. I can remember spending hours in our computer room, which, again, a thing none of us have anymore in our homes, but often did in the past when you had a big device, down in the basement playing with this computer, what we considered was just a fun toy. Typing out little stories and letters, clicking and using the mouse that couldn't scroll and couldn't roll, but could click to be able to make word art and use clip art to create patterns and different things that we would print out and put on the fridge with a track-fed printer. And I bring this up because you can look at this and say, wow, this thing is hella rudimentary. It's black and white screen. It has very low functionality. But it was such an advancement at the time where computers like this started to come out. And I was lucky enough to have parents, a scientific mother, a passionate business owning father, to start to expose us to think about how technology would impact and intersect with our lives as we grow up. And I'm really, really grateful because today I'm coming to you still from a Macintosh product. I have a 2020 MacBook Pro. And while it's still kind of expensive, it's a heck of a lot less than what it cost to buy one of these bad boys new back in the 80s. As we think about the power and capability and capacity of this unit, how much has changed and grown, it's impressive. I mean, just to think about where we've moved from, not to mention move towards having that in the palm of our hands, right? I don't think if you had asked most consumers that had one of these in their homes what it would look like in 40 or so years to have a computer in the future, we would have necessarily been able to predict where we are today. And I want to use that illusion across time to say Macs have changed a lot, right? I mean, many of us probably, as you're looking at these, can say, oh, I had that one in grad school, or oh, I used that one at a friend's house, or oh, I have that one at home. And we can see that over time, those costs come down. Their limitations are overcome. They're not black and white screened anymore. They're not heavy or bulky. Their performance and capability, well, they do the same tasks for us, making pretty pictures of clip art, sending missives, writing letters. They do them very differently, and they're very intuitive to what a consumer needs, to where the technology can evolve and grow to meet the scalability and affordability requirements we all have to be able to really utilize these devices. And so I draw the same question of what will cellular agriculture continue to look like? And how do we think about moving the discussion from cell-based, cells of cells, to cell-made, to cell-derived, to cell-manufactured? And so I want to bring up monoclonal antibodies. When we think about cell culture 1.0 here at Biomilq, We talk a lot about the 80s again, utilizing MABs, utilizing Chinese hamster ovary cells to produce a protein or a component of interest, purify it down, and inject it in a human to prevent things like the rejection of an organ. I think the early rudimentary space of cell culture was looking at understanding cells as pharmaceutical inputs and nothing more. Thinking about just how we manipulate them, grow them, change them to get them to act a certain way that we want to make something that's useful to humanity. And we can kind of brute force it, to be honest. We can genetically program, we can manipulate, we can stimulate the cells, we can pressure them through evolutionary pressure to act how we want. But we weren't always leveraging the fundamental capability of the cells to do that. And we were solving a problem that could cost a lot of money to solve, because at the end of the day, it saves someone's life. And so when Cell Culture 2.0 debuted, as I would call it, in 2013, Mark Post showed his first hamburger at $330,000 to the world. We all stopped and said, we could use cells to solve a different problem, to act differently, still the same fundamental capabilities, but we can have them be the product instead of just making a product and being this input to a process most of us don't understand. And we began to understand cells as the end product, the work that Upside and Just and others are doing to be able to produce not just slurries of cells and meat, but looking to even whole cuts in the future, necessitates a brute force approach at just growing lots and lots of cells, focusing on one fundamental cellular behavior, right? Upgrowth, proliferation, getting them to just multiply and duplicate enough so that we can create products out of them. And Cell Culture 2.0, if I do say so myself, is pretty exciting. I think we're making huge strides forward in this work, and I'm really proud to see that evolution happening, that we're thinking differently about how we use cells. We're getting over the biofuel bubbles of the past and fermentation, other spaces, and asking ourselves, how do mammalian cell culture move the world forward and solve big, audacious goals? But then it asks the question, what's 3.0? Are we there yet? What will it look like? And I think we're on the edge of it. It feels like we are some days at Biomilq. And I wanted to introduce the idea of understanding cells as the producers of those goods, not as inputs, not as the product, but actually as the processors, as the biomanufacturing capability. We haven't solved this problem. We are not a technology that's scaled. We're just beginning to think about how Biomilq in some ways is a bridge, thinking forward to not utilizing the cells as the product, not just brute forcing them as inputs to act as we want, but inherently aligning what we want the cells to do with their biology. How do we make their biology more efficient, but allow nature to do what it already does best, what it already does more proficiently than any of us can do? And that in our case is using human mammary epithelial cells, where they're able to compartmentalize, pull nutrients from one side, secrete milk out the other side. They're able to produce thousands of components of interest instead of one. And all we have to do is figure out evolutionarily what makes them tick. What are their biosynthetic pathways? What are they capable of? How do we leverage their ability to already do a kick-ass job, but do it outside of the body for us? And as we think about this as maybe some of the next phase of Cell Culture 3.0, what is it going to necessitate us to think differently on cells about? And so let's start to think cells as a part of our biomanufacturing team. This slide is super hokey. It's very Biomilq. I hope you like it. And that's to say, we personify the cells. We think about, in some ways, hiring them for a job, much less of just one more input that goes into our process, but rather what they are inherently and what they're capable of, and growing them, getting them to be better, to act better, to produce more. It's kind of like how many of us think about team development and team growth. Not only do we want them to be good at the fundamentals, right? But also thinking ahead to how do they grow, produce new things, expand? How do they do what they do best, but in a better manner, more efficiently, and maybe outside of the box of how we would even think about these cells performing? The best employees surprise us, right? They're able to anticipate needs, they grow, they evolve, they change. And why shouldn't we leverage cell culture to do the same? Why should it just be stagnant to do one process that we expect, instead of being able to do many processes that the body of mammalian systems has already programmed it to do? And so I encourage us as a cellular agriculture community to see the impossible as imperative. Just begin to say pharma, regenerative medicine doesn't just have to leap all the way to food products, brute force as many cell growth as possible, but what are the in-betweens and what are the extensions of this continuum? We at Biomilq like to talk about that some see ideas as crazy and some see ideas as visionary. And it's important to put into context as we hear things from, say, the counter article about why this technology is not scalable, to begin to think about maybe that this iteration does look different, that there's going to be evolutions, there's going to be cost reduction, there's going to be scalability, but we must evolve and grow as a community in how we see cells to be able to do that. These are some of my favorite quotes that I think exemplify how absurd and ridiculous we are at not being able to see the future of technology, not being comfortable with the unknowns, not knowing where it's going to go, but believing that we have to evolve and grow to get there. Just like mammalian systems do in the body, grow older and develop and change, we also have to let them do that in our cell culture. And how do we learn from them and what they're capable of to get there? I'm going to end. Can you not see my slides? I'm just realizing. Go back here. We're good. I'm going to show you the quotes because I want you to see them. Can we all see them now? Yes, thumbs up, Ahmed. Thank you. I was clicking in two different spots. And I'm going to let you take a minute to look at these quotes because they really crack me up. And I hope they do you too. And so I'm going to end on, again, something very Biomilq, a little hokey, but is to say, we hope the cell ag community can embody the values we need for evolution. These are our internal values, but I think that in many ways, they could be replicated across the sector as we start to think about what it looks like as companies, as participants in this evolution of technological change, and how we're going to have to act to be able to get there. We're going to have to be brave, acknowledging what we do and don't know, acknowledging that we don't have to be the hero and solve this 100%, and acknowledge that we're going to have to ask for help when things aren't working. Be resilient, celebrate little wins like launching products somewhere in the world, but also leaning into the productive conflict that comes out of the fact that there's a lot we don't know and a lot of things that aren't going well. Being open to the fact instead of just responding to an article that's negative, thinking thoughtfully about what it brings up as some of the challenges that we are facing, failing, learning, growing, repeating that process again. Being conscientious, transparent, ensuring the accuracy and integrity of work and how it's presented is first and foremost, not over-promising, instead under-promising and over-delivering as the technology evolves, grows, changes with our companies. Being determined and thinking about how we grow and move as a sector, not just as individual companies trying to get out ahead of the pack. And finally, being authentic, setting clear, honest, and realistic expectations for ourselves and others, and being open to learning in public. What we're doing is inherently really, really hard. And I think a lot of the secrets to unlocking this capability lies in the cells themselves. It's going to depend on us to figure out what these cells are best at and how we, instead of just utilizing them as inputs or forcing them to act in a certain way, begin to dance in concert with their capabilities, their strengths, and what they're going to be best at in creating new products, new innovations, and new, I believe, foundationally groundbreaking impact for our world. Thanks for sticking with me through my soapbox chat today, and I'm happy to talk about whatever you'd like.